to the comments are pretty priceless. I love working for a tech. I'm not the one who does it wrong. Okay, do we have audio now? Okay, it looks like we're back on. So, now that we've actually got audio, we'll start with the introduction again. So, Dr. Alistair Coburn, one of the original signatories of the Agile Manifesto, longtime advisor and thought leader to the Agile movement. I will turn it over to you, sir, to continue to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I started off in Salt Lake City as a hardware designer, interestingly enough, designing supercomputers for flight simulators. And I became a software guy when I moved to Switzerland and was working for IBM Research. But the topic that's relevant these days is in 1991, so like almost 30 years ago, I was hired by IBM to create a methodology for Smalltalk and C++ projects at the time and later Java. And I didn't know anything about methodologies, so my boss gave me unlimited airplane tickets to fly around the world and just debrief teams and find out what worked and didn't work. So my history for the 90s, the early 90s, was just interviewing teams and saying, what did you do that worked? What do you like? What do you not like? Etc. And then I was in charge of a project in 94, 95. It was a fixed time, fixed price project that IBM was doing with Ralston Purina in St. Louis. And we had to apply all of the ideas that I'd been seeing for those previous years. So they all got road tested in 94, 95. Now, Agile came about because at that same time, 94, 95, 96, 97, the Scrum guys were getting started with Scrum. The extreme programming guys were getting started with extreme programming. In Europe, there was DSDM. In Australia, there was FDD. Like all of these different groups were saying fairly similar things, which was basically high communication, frequent delivery, and reflective improvement is the magic, and pay less attention to formal rules of processes and much more about the quality of collaboration and the feedback from the delivery. So that was all sort of the message in the 90s. And then in 2001, we wrote the Agile Manifesto in Salt Lake up in Snowbird in February, and the 20th anniversary is coming up. And I became, at some point, an independent consultant, and from 2000 to 1, have been a consultant. So I've been hardware designer, software designer, been a project manager, methodologist, and now it's called organizational psychology, which is wonderful because if you say you're a psychologist, you don't have to fix anybody, right? So as an organizational psychologist, I can tell you what's wrong with you, but it's not my job to fix you, right? That's your problem. And so I love to speak a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a lot serious. So I'll flip between like tongue-in-cheek and serious if possible. So let's see what questions you have.
Definitely possible. Okay, so let's get to the questions. We're going to start off with some of the questions that you had submitted previously. Thank you very much. If you would like to submit a question while we're going on, just go ahead and go to the live event Q&A question there. I'm monitoring that as we go. First question for Dr. Coburn. I would like to ask Dr. Coburn his thoughts on Dave Thomas's statement, "Agile is dead," and what does he see in the future of development?
Interesting, yeah. I gave a eulogy to Agile in 2009, in which I repeated the soliloquy from Julius Caesar after Julius Caesar got murdered, and I used waterfall and Agile there. But at that point in 2009, what I was declaring was that Agile had hit an inflection point. Not that it was dead, but the old Agile, the Agile of the 90s was gone. The Agile of the early 2000s had grown and morphed to a point that it was changing. And so that old Agile was dead, and we were actually on a jump curve at an inflection point. That's what I meant when I said Agile is dead in 2009. Now, Dave Thomas, for reasons that I don't understand, has always been sorry that he wrote the Agile Manifesto. and I don't know why, but he doesn't like the direction it took from the beginning. He went and created the pragmatic programmers. He wrote the Pickaxe books. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. And as far as he's concerned, Agile just took the wrong track the moment that people started getting certifications, and it became the Agile industrial complex, as people call it. And he literally regrets having helped write the manifesto. So he and I differ on this point. I think we did net good to the world. He thinks we did net bad to the world. And so when he says it's dead, it's not clear. I think, again, he means the original spirit is gone and that the words have been corrupted. What I say is we're in a post-Agile age. My way, like update, 2009, we hit an inflection point. In 2013, I said we were already had entered the post-Agile age. And I say that a lot these days. And what I mean by post-Agile age is the stuff we used to beg for in the 90s and we fought for in the 2000s is now part of people's DNA. It's part of the mitochondria. It's inside the cell structure. And we say, talk together, work incrementally, ship up and get feedback. Like, what's new? That's how we work. That's like, people just expect that these days. That's not a thing to fight over, right? So in that sense, it's like, okay, that's a given. Of course we do that. And what's next? And what else? And that's what I mean by post-Agile. We're in the what else part. So there are people who still have to catch up and learn that communication is important, incremental development, feedback, da-da-da-da. But the bulk of the world has got that. And they're in the now, and now what? And so when I hear Agile is dead, post-Agile age, that's what I'm referring to.
Excellent. All right, and by the way, if you have a chance, check the video out. If you search for the term "I come to bury Agile," not use it. It's quite spectacular from my humble perspective. Okay, next up, one of the principles behind the Agile Manifesto is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. How do you extrapolate that to teams that are spread out geographically and teams that are dispersed due to the COVID pandemic?
Quick ad for my book, Agile Software Development, The Cooperative Game, in which I have a very famous curve about that, which is when you're attempting to convey information to somebody else, because there are other things you could wish to do, but when you're attempting to convey information, the most effective way of conveying information is basically two people standing at a whiteboard. Right? And they draw on the whiteboard, they talk, they move back and forth, they shift body positions. All of that stuff is live. And I have never yet to this day seen a more effective way to communicate ideas between two people, share and build ideas. Bar none. Now, so when you can't do that, then everything we do is to simulate getting close to that using technology. And so technology is your friend, and so you want the always-on cameras on your workstations, the mics, you want the big screens. I've seen development teams, in particular in Australia, working with the Philippines, and they have giant screens and a camera. And so one of them says to me, "Hey, Alistair, come meet the team in the Philippines." And so we walk up to the camera, and it's like a big window, and some of the people from the other team come over, and literally we talk like this, like we're face to face. Also, there's a thing called the double, which is a little baby Segway with a tablet mounted on top, and somebody who's remote can literally drive it around into meeting rooms, down the hallway, into the cafeteria, and participate in conversations. That's a matter of creating presence in the informal context. So here, what we're doing in when you can't literally be together, we're using technology to be as close as we can, and that's why you see so many Zoom calls and stuff like that. But it's never the same. It's never the same. And all the people who've been co-located and got separated just beg for the moment they can see the people again. And people who've always been co-located are kind of shocked when they actually go and meet everybody. They get the binding, they get the oh, that's what the person looks like, sounds like. right? They go to a bar together or a football game together. They play ping pong together, whatever it is they do. And that binding is socially that happens literally in physical presence then carries over and permits a richer communication than distributed. So what we're doing in COVID is using technology to simulate as close as we can what we would have if we were standing at a whiteboard. And I have to say that in my current efforts, Heart of Agile, and we're a distributed team. There's 3 of us at the core: Georgia in Belgrade, Serbia, Sole in Brussels, Belgium, and me here. And we work so hard. We have had really good sessions together in the same city. We haven't been able to see each other for a year, and we try as hard as we can, and we just beg for the opportunity to have like a weekend together so we can like clean up all of those little tiny misinterpretations and have that richness that comes through physically being next to another person, which would then give us some comfort and safety for when we distribute again.
Excellent. Of course, the downside of co-located teams is when you have a teammate like me, you have to be in the same place as they are. So there's always a downside.
Well, so here's an odd thing, because what I love about science is curves work both ways, right? That curve says more and efficient. And I will tell a story, not on Jonathan. I'll tell a story on someone else, and you can extrapolate to Jonathan as you see fit. But there was this lady who was very sharp, but she had a very strong personality. And she was working in England for a while, and I talked to some of her teammates about exactly this. They were in those days using speakerphone, and they said they liked having her on speakerphone because it diluted her personality a bit. Right? So the curve works both ways, is what I'm saying, right? Have the kill switch, make it low grade black and white with lots of video snow. If you want to dilute the message a little bit.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay, next up. I got this question, and it was actually in context with it, but I lost the context, so I'm just going to ask it blind, just because I like asking this question blind. Let's see where we go with this. How do you motivate team members to do the, in quotation marks, the right thing?
So, there's an entire category of questions that I refuse to answer, of which this is an example. But that category of questions goes like this. It's, how do I get somebody else to do what I want them to do even though they don't want to do it? And that's a dominant question that's asked by everybody, right? Colleagues ask that. How do I get the other colleague to do that? Bosses ask that. And A, I don't think it's possible, but B, if it was possible, I wouldn't give the answer, because if there was a technology for doing that, then the Chinese and the Koreans and everybody would start applying it. So I don't think it's possible. But in general, I'll stay away from it. How do you motivate somebody else to do what you want them to do and they don't want to do? Not touching it. Good luck.
Exactly. Okay, we'll come back. We've got some questions that kind of, they circle around that one a little bit, so we'll come back to that. Let's talk about an organization. What is your experience with measuring the agility of an organization?
I want to tell a story against Jonathan. So in another of my, why not? Hey, Jonathan's used to this. I always tell stories about Jonathan. But in another of my books, which is Crystal Clear, which came out in 2005, I at that time, and yeah, that one right there, at that point in time, people were very against measuring agility. It was like the Agile crowd said, I don't want to know about it, I don't want to measure it, et cetera, et cetera. And I decided I was going to take it on and say, like, how would you tell anything about how well you're doing in the agility framework? And so there's a page in that book, in the frequently asked questions, how agile I'm being and whatever, how crystal am I being or whatever. And I didn't do anything you could put numbers to. I just said, how frequently are you actually showing software, if you're in a software company, how frequently are you actually showing software to your users? And how frequently do you reflect? And how long does it take you to get a question answered by an expert user or a business person or whomever you need? And it's nice because it tells you a little bit where you are in a soft sense. And I took it to the Salt Lake Agile Roundtable one day and was showing this to, and I said, and the cool thing is, of course, you can't put numbers on this. And then Jonathan said, yes, you can, let's do it. And so we did, found a way to put numbers on them. And of course, Jonathan's team won as having the highest score for being the most agile. And that's the most I'll say about Jonathan and his competitive streak. But the questions are really around how long does it take you to get a question answered, right? Because, and are we in a software development situation here? I'll stick straight with software, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, we're good. Mostly software developers. Yes.
Okay, good. I'll just stay inside software.
And QA.
Yeah, but it's a software company. We have a software product, so that'll make the answers a certain way. So the question is, I mean, everybody is making decisions, design decisions, strategy decisions, market decisions, right? All of these kinds of things, and there's a lot of questions being asked, and really in what we learned, and we coined the word agile, like to talk about it, but how quickly can somebody discover information either that they need, like answer this question, or that they should have known about but didn't know to ask the question. So serendipitous discovery of information that you go, oh, I wish I'd known that a little bit ago. So that serendipitous discovery of information and getting questions answered is core to the speed of the movement of the organization and core to the correctness, the quality, and the value of what they produce. So everything, when you say, how can we measure how agile we are? That's point one, right? How fast can you get a question answered? Point two is, and this is in the delivery, we're after feedback again. There's bugs everywhere, and there's bugs from like we think our strategic market is this, to our design is this, to our user interface design is, to the code is this, to the strategic product is this, to the interface is this, right? There's bugs everywhere. And what you're trying to do is to find the bugs the quickest possible. So what's your feedback loop? Feedback loop from the business to the customer, feedback loop from the coders to the testers, to the market, et cetera, like that. So that's your second test of agility. And the third one is less a test of agility, but it's just, do you ever stop and think about what you're doing, reflect a bit, have a chance to change directions? And that was the thing that I discovered in the early 90s that was magical, was a project that went 4 months completely wrong, and I already knew enough at the time it was a dead project. But what surprised the heck out of me was they stopped after 4 months. They did a terrible delivery. They were demotivated. And they said, how do we fix things from here? And they changed literally everything about the project. Everything. The people, the methodology, the teaming structure, right? They had to stay with their assignment. And that became part of my PhD dissertation, 10 years later. And it's core to the Agile thing is the fact you can change your process. You can change your team. You can change your methodology. You can change anything if you stop and think about it, maybe once a month. I think once a week is kind of often, but once a month is kind of slow. But it's an okay time frame. So when you say how well do we measure, I'm not going to give you a real number, but you can look at that. And I don't think you need a number like 87. I think you say, how can we get answers faster? How can we discover things sooner? How do we get feedback sooner, right? And how much are we willing to change? How can we change as we go to get better? Those are the indicators, the measures of agility.
Very good. We're going to change tracks a little bit. We've got one of the live questions here. So, Alistair, are you coming to Snowbird to ski in February to celebrate the 20-year anniversary?
I am. As far as I know. Rumor reached me that somebody booked the exact meeting room we met at for the exact day that we signed, we wrote the thing February 13th. But I'm not going back up there to replay history. I'm going up there to ski. So I might go the following Monday and literally just get a 2-day ski pass and ski.
All right. Well, now you know where to find Alistair in February. Okay, next up, I'm going to flip this one a little bit. So Jerome asked the question, would you know, or what do you think is the most used flavor of Agile? And I'm going to ask you to also answer, what do you think is the least used flavor of Agile?
You bum. Very good, very good, very good. Oh, the most used is Scrum. There's no question about that. And an odd piece for you guys, bit of the history of Scrum. Why is Scrum so popular? Because in the late 90s, XP was totally the dominant methodology out there in this space. When we wrote the manifesto in 2001, people thought that Agile was just a rebranding of extreme programming. And we had to say, no. There's like 7 or 8 methodologies. It's a common term. And people went, nah, you just meant extreme programming. Then Kent Beck, who literally kind of created the space single-handedly as a programmer and fought off all comers and did a brilliant job, kind of got burned out and he went quiet and he just went, I'm done. And he just stopped talking for a couple of years. Like we literally have no idea what happened to him. Exactly about in that time, Ken Schwaber created the Certified Scrum Master. Now, the story of this is a little bit interesting because the way it goes, and I've corroborated the story with Ken. So he's at some big company, and he says, I want to teach you, a course on Scrum. And they say, well, to do that, we have to have certificates. Now, in those days, a certificate only meant a certificate of completion of a course. It wasn't like it is now with, these 2 days role certifications. It was just, that you had a course. But he goes, yeah, I can do that. And he created at that moment the Certified Scrum Master. And so he says, well, you'll be a Certified Scrum Master when you come out of this course. And then a friend of his in Switzerland, Joe Pellerine, said, hey, that's a cool course. Can I teach it too? And Ken said, yeah, sure, you're a good guy. Here's my slide deck. Do something with it. And then Joe Pellerine sent him back a list of students and said, here are all the students that are now Certified Scrum Masters. And Ken Schwaber goes, crap, now I have to keep track of all of these people. So he said, give me $50 a person and I'll make a database, right? But what Ken did there was he shifted. Instead of saying, hey, I went to a 2-day course on use cases from Alistair, I have a certificate that says I went to a 2-day course on use cases from Alistair. People got a certificate that said, I am a certified Scrum Master, right? So there was like a jump up in the perception of the title there. And so people started putting that in their emails. And I remember the first time I said that, what the heck is this person doing, putting Certified Scrum Master, like I went to a 2-day course, like below their signature. But that's what took it off. Everybody wanted to be a Certified Scrum Master. And then suddenly, executives were fighting, I'm more agile than you are because I've got 23 Certified Scrum Masters in my organization. And you only have 19. Ha, 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 ha. And so there was this like mad dash to add these, certified role titles. And that's when Scrum took off like a rocket, right? It's because of the Certified Scrum Master. And I was a certified Scrum trainer up until this year when I kicked over to all the Heart of Agile stuff. But although we make fun of the Certified Scrum Master class, and I did also when I was a certified Scrum trainer, I have to give real credit for that. There was a boomerang effect on that, which is that like Lockheed Martin, which refused to do any kind of incremental development all through the 90s and the early 2000s, even though people had been trying to do it for decades, suddenly had 1,000 certified Scrum Masters running around the organization yelling, pigs, chickens, roadblock, impediment, right, all this stuff. And they started doing incremental development because they started doing Scrum. So in a very, really weird roundabout way, this certificate, this hoax certificate title that Ken Schwaber made literally has changed giant organizations like Lockheed Martin. So that's very cool. So there's hands down more people doing Scrum than anything else. Now, Jonathan's poking at me a little bit because I poked at him, and that's very cool. Because the least used one on the planet, as far as I know, is mine, called Crystal, the one that he showed the book. And researchers will call up and, yeah, that one right there. And by the way, if you follow what he does pretty much crystal clear is what he does, right? It's what he does. And it came from my grounded research, right? So all I did was document good small teams work this way. That's what I put in the book, right? But I don't go into like you have to have a meeting here and there. It's much more on the principles and talk to each other thing. Every now and then, some researcher will send me, and this has been going on since about 2005, 2008. And they go, hey, we're doing a research study. We've got N100, Scrum projects. We're evaluating and DSDM projects and stuff. How many Crystal projects are there in the world? And I go, I know of about 4. Maybe we double that. People who don't tell me, there's 10. Let's just say there's 10. There's 10 projects in the world doing Crystal. I don't know, right? And they go, then they lose interest in Crystal, and they go away. So Crystal, and interestingly, Jonathan, Georgia, our man in Serbia, has a pack of people there, and they're doing all the Heart of Agile Academy development, and he doesn't know Crystal from a manhole cover, but he's doing Crystal exactly as you could imagine, right? That wouldn't surprise you.
Yeah, the number of teams that have no idea that they always apologize for doing Agile badly. It turns out they're doing Crystal just fine.
Yeah, the only challenge I have, if anybody says they're doing Crystal, is are they actually reflecting? That's the only question I have, is do they actually reflect? That being the secret sauce.
Right. Okay. Related question to that. This one may set off a little bit of a civil company, which a little creative conflict can be good at times. So within the organization, if you have an Agile Governance board that initiates, reviews, and implements processes, what do you do at the team level? What should the teams be doing?
So to try to rephrase that question in a way that I think I could do anything with, starting in the late 90s, I started asking myself the question, how much commonality do you need between teams or across teams? And the thinking here is that to be a successful methodology, the team has to adjust and tune it themselves. If the team doesn't have a chance to adjust and tune it, they'll basically reject it. So it's a critical success factor for methodology adoption is the tuning and shaping to themselves of whatever the base methodology is, which says that all teams are going to be doing things a little bit differently. And if you look at some of the more interesting organizations, even if they claim to doing Scrum, some use Trello, some use sticky notes, some use burn down charts, some use Kanban boards, some have personas this way, and some do something else differently. Right? There's so many variations, you almost like have trouble finding out where's the Scrum thing. So the question is, if you want to, in a sense, maximize the variability across teams so they each work in their own best way, the super interesting question is, what is the least you can legislate from the top without invading their proper cultural space, so to speak? And I have actually just 1 or 2 things, which is the reporting structure should be a burn-up chart. And a burn-up chart to the old classical project management people is the same as an earned value management chart. And so you put each tick mark as a sprint, and you say what you got delivered. And you have a target. We're trying to get to here. We think it's about this big, and you've got intended growth, and of course, trailing along below it is actual accomplishment. And the reason this is nice, and probably isn't applicable for you guys, but the same chart works for a pure waterfall project and a pure agile project. And so this is a way of reporting progress that everybody can see very quickly. We're behind schedule, we're over budget, whatever. So that is, and if they're reporting out, almost everything else doesn't matter, right? If they're, what are the details of the way they're working? So the question then, and you called it the PMO, right? What did you call the thing in your question? You said it.
Agile Governance.
Yeah. So if there was going to be Agile Governance, in my book, they would be asking questions like, how often are you showing things to real users? They'd say, how often are you reflecting? What have you changed recently? How do you show your sponsors and stakeholders and the execs your progress? What's the quality of citizenship inside your group? Right? Those are the kinds of questions they'd be asking instead of telling, right? So they're question-oriented rather than telling-oriented.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, from Brad, we've got, how can you get and maintain the big picture of a software system when you're frequently only working on small parts of it?
So I'm going to channel Ward Cunningham, and he gave a pretty, it's a bit of a non-answer, but it's a bit of an answer. It's one of, mystical. He's a kind of a mystical guy, and it's not a mystical answer, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. Because I asked him one point, exactly this question. I said, hey, in extreme programming, you guys don't do big designs. You're just like doing these micro touches and refactoring all the time. How can you get a good architecture? Now, I'm going to disagree with some part of XP in a minute, but I want to give it's a very, very lovely answer that he gave. He said, well, the French impressionist painters like Seurat, who painted one dot at a time. It's not like he always kept his eye this close to the painting. He'd walk back and he'd look at it, and he has his palette, and he's getting some dot on his paintbrush. He's putting some colors on the palette, and he's walking in, and as he's walking in, he can see where he wants to put a dot. So it was never the case that Seurat would paint one of these giant pictures one dot at a time, just literally one dot at a time. You zoom in and you zoom out, and you zoom in and you zoom out. And that was Ward trying to find a way to tell me that, yeah, the big picture is important. I like to have a master plan that's months in advance, but it's big loose blocks. Like basically, we're going to work on customer profiles here. We're gonna put in invoicing here. We're going to put in a loyalty program here, right? And those things aren't going to change very much because they're big and loose, And then as you go along, you can change the details, and let's pull a bit of that loyalty program forward, right? A little bit of it like that. Architecturally, the same thing. What are the big blocks? What are the big decisions? What are the big things we're working on? What are the worries that we have? Whether it's performance, let's just say scaling, something like that, security, whatever it could be, APIs, whatever technologies you're using. Those are big boulders in the decision space, and it's good to have them there because they probably aren't going to change very much because they're big and globular like that. So it was a shock to me. I don't know when it was, but it was like 6-8 years after the Extreme Programming book was written that I found that he actually had release planning. There's a chapter on release planning in the book. So I had all those years thought that XP had no release planning, and they only did like user stories. And then I found that in 1999, Kent Beck had actually written a whole chapter on release planning, working out what the big blocks are and what you think approximately you're going to be giving. So yeah, you definitely, both for the schedule, the architecture, the functionality, you want those big blocks to give the shape, roughly speaking, shape and size of what you're doing. And then you go pick out bits, and then you step back and you check how you're doing, and do we want to change direction? Do we keep going? Whatever. So yeah, zoom in. That zoom in, zoom out, like Ward talked about, is true.
Very nice. I'd be curious to see how many miles that painter comes zooming in and zooming out.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's a lot of walking on that one.
Okay, here's another one for you. This may or may not be one of my own questions. 20 years of Agile. What is the most irritating thing over all this time for you as one of the original manifesto stories?
Programmers telling their bosses that they don't have to give us a date or a schedule or an estimate. Been like from the very beginning, we never said that, we never meant that, and all over the world, from like the first moment we wrote that manifesto, programmers go and tell their bosses, yeah, I'm doing Agile, I don't have to give you a date. And I'll tell you two short stories about that. It happens, both of them happened in Nokia in Finland about the same year, probably about 2008 or something. This guy comes into the meeting room and he says, I love Agile. I just got done telling somebody that, that we don't have to give them a schedule. And I said, I'm short selling stock in Nokia. I didn't know I should have actually short sold stock in Nokia in 2008. But anyway, what I said, I'm short selling stock in Nokia because that's no way to run a company, right? You can't run a business saying there are no dates. You have to know. You have to know something. The market's doing stuff. Your competitors. You got budgets. You got stuff. You have to. The other thing, though, and is in a serious way, I met the guy who was in charge of methodologies and processes for all of Nokia. Now, Nokia is a really loose organization. Nobody even knew they had a process or a methodology. Like, nobody literally knew how products were built. So this guy was pretty silent, I guess, whatever. But he met me in the hall. I had to meet him. And he goes, oh, and this is partly for you, Jonathan. You'll catch the irony in this. He says, we can't use agile methods like RUP because there's no estimates, there's no dates, and we can't do that. And I said, I'm entirely with you. I agree. You have to have a date and a cost. Now, the question I have for you is to how many decimal places do you need that time and cost? And he said, I see why they sent you. And my point was, if it's going to be a $300,000 project, you need to know, is it a $300,000 project or a $3 million project? You need to know that. And you need to know, is it a $300,000 project or a $700,000 project? You need to know that. You don't need to know if it's a $300,000 project or a $330,000 project. That you take up on the fly, right? That's normal wiggle. And same thing, we need to deliver before the next election, before Christmas, before something, right? Now Christmas is special. If you're in retail, I love it, right? Black Friday, midnight, you don't get to say, I'm doing Agile, I'll tell you when I'm done. I'm sorry, you're done yay many weeks before Black Friday because Black Friday's the day, right? Boom. Even this year, although I'm curious if they'll open up early. But my point is, if you're going to have a hard deadline, Agile, incremental development, growth of value, et cetera, is the only way to play the game. And there's a thing that, if I'm lucky, maybe I'll get to teach you guys, which is the elephant carpaccio exercise. And the end of that's a thing called trim the tail. And the point is, if you develop in slices with attention to value and catching errors early, then the stuff that you leave till the end is the stuff you can cut when you run out of time. And so you have the biggest delivery window with the least impact, negative impact, and the most variability if you work in that way. And that only comes from the Agile world. The other people can't even play at it. So if you have a hard deadline, the trim the tail, carpaccio trim the tail Agile method is the only game in town. And that's something that I was happy to say to Nokia applies the same for a one-person project, three-person project, or a 7,000-person project, is this idea of growth of running curves, integrated value, and a trim the tail section at the end where you have a slider and you can move the delivery date. You play quality versus delivery date versus features at that very end in a certain way. So yeah.
If there's any one exercise I'd like to see you practice at Navitaire, it is that elephant carpaccio. I think it'd be really valuable. Plus, also, I think it'd be fun to play the waterfall is more efficient than Agile game too.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of a sideways, similar concept. How can we appropriately leverage Agile concepts when our customers are expected to be working with fixed bid, fixed scope projects?
So I don't know much about can you say anything about your purchaser base?
Yeah, so they're airlines. Our primary customers are airlines, specifically low-cost carriers.
Got it. Jeff Patton, who invented this thing called story mapping, wrote a brilliant paper in the 2004 Agile conference, which is called Unfixing the Fixed Price Contract. And see if you can manage to get a hold of it. It's really hard to get a hold of anymore, Jonathan. But he worked at a company that always bid fixed price projects. Now remember, I started off in '94 on a fixed price project for IBM, $15 million fixed price project. It was actually bid at $10 million, came in at $15 million. It was on time, on target, on contract, on features, on scope, but over budget. And it was still being used 10 years later, so it was a success. So we did do that. We delivered every 3 months. But we had a very, very, very nice, friendly client. In Jeff Patton's case, the big boss would go out and sell a contract, and it would always be 4 to 5 months, fixed price, fixed everything, and always overbid, of course, because that's what salespeople do. And Jeff was the only one who escaped with his life on this. Everybody else just had to work overtime. And actually, it was interviewing Jeff that I learned this trim the tail thing, which I then took to Nokia. It was the way he worked. But what he wrote in this paper was that he would be very careful to write the spec as kind of vague, loose, bullet point-ish as he could. Because then, and he worked trim the tail, he would get the key element of every bullet point in place first, and then enrich the delivery of each bullet point until he ran out of time. And then when he delivered, it was clear that he had delivered everything that was in the spec. And the things that were left out were the things that were the least significant. And it was by interviewing him like repeatedly, like over a period of like 2 years, that I figured out this trim the tail stuff. And by the way, the big boys like General Electric, when they write contracts with the government and everybody else, they do the same thing. The master requirements document is as undetailed as possible, and that gives you the chance, the most flexibility for when you run out of time. So if you have a fixed price, fixed scope contract, what you do is you get the basic elements of everything in place first. What Jeff ended up calling if you grade each feature like it's A is outstanding, B, C is tolerable, D means meets the contract but is unusable, and F means fails the contract. You basically get all of the bullet points up to quality C. It's usable, you could deliver, it's not brilliant, but it's there. And then you use the time you have left to improve the quality of selected bits to B and A, like that, till you run out of time, and that's the trim the tail game. That's the only strategy I know of for this kind of hard fixed price, fixed scope contracts. Oh, one more thing. All contracts depend on the quality of the relationship between the buyer and the seller. Your contract can be whatever, and if they hate you, they're going to do something nasty to you, and if they love you, they'll forgive you. So having a really good relationship is super key when you get to the end game and they're going, yes, it's there, or no, it's not there. You really want them on your side, and part of the relationship building is that demo, show, listening, make changes, adapting, etc.
That could bring up some questions about your relationship with your contractors, but we'll save that for another.
No, I use this all for myself, and I just bought a house, and so I've got a brand new plumber, electrician, roofer, and this is the first thing I do. I had a guy for my big mansion house that I had in Salt Lake. We needed a basement entry put in because it was up on stilts on a bit of a hill thing, and my wife wanted a basement, entry. And so they had to dig out under and put in some steps and stuff. And the contractor came and gave us a bid for, I don't know, $40,000, some number. And day one, he goes and knocks a hole in the concrete somewhere, sticks his head in and says, hey, the joists aren't running this way, they're running that way. I have to change my bid. And I said, can we do this time and materials, please? Because you're just going to change the bid every time you get new information. And that just means it's not a fixed price bid. You're just going to keep raising the number on me. And he said, well, if you don't mind taking the extra risk, I'll cut my profit down from, 10% to 5%, whatever my, his markup of over the workers. Said, I don't see any risk because you're just going to keep changing the numbers anyway. He says, well, most people don't understand that. They think there's more risk, but if you're willing to do that, I'll drop my profit margin and we'll do time and materials. We went to that in a heartbeat, and that was the best thing ever, because then I could say, hey, by the way, we want a secret passageway between these two bedrooms. Can you put that in? And hey, the fence needs short. I just bought a house. I did the exact same thing with the plumber and the electrician. They came in, they put in a fixed price bid, like this would be $8,000, so you have to rewire the house. I say to the electrician, I know it's not going to be $8,000. Can we just go to time and materials? Like, tell me how much you charge per hour because blah, blah, blah. We go there. He says, this is a 150 amp box. We need a 200 amp box because you're going to put in, one of these electrical water heaters, continuous flow water heaters. That's not in the bid. I go, I know it's not in the bid, right? It's an extra $1,000. Like, don't play games with me. Let's just do time and materials, right? I said, we have to be friends. Let's go. Whatever you need, let me help you. Same thing with the plumber, right? Get that relationship good. And so now the electrician said, look, if I can get everything under the bid price, I won't charge you anything by the hour. And if I have to go over, then I'll just charge you by the hour over that. I'll do whatever's cheaper, right? I'll make it good. So yeah, absolutely apply this. Absolutely.
It's been kind of fascinating to watch. You're the only person I know that actually changes the business model and the engagement model of the companies you work with. It's been entertaining to watch that. Okay, next question. This one relates to management. Now, I'm going to give you a little context for this one. We do have multiple teams per product, so we have scalings in play here from a team perspective. The question is, what is the role of management in the Agile world? More specifically, what should be expectations of the people managers or the technical managers outside of individual Scrum teams? Or should they be outside of individual Scrum teams?
Now, I actually don't have a good answer for that one. It's been a dangling question for like 15 years, and I ask people, and I keep waiting for interesting answers that I can like really hang on to. And I haven't found any that really sing to me, if you know what I mean. What they did at Spotify is they made it so that there are these, the people managers are in charge of the technical specialties, right? So there's somebody who's in charge of the UI designers and is in charge of like their education, the technical quality, things like that. And so that's not a general purpose person manager, right? And then you've got the HR category of manager, and they can do a lot more, handle a lot more people because they're not going to do the actual evaluations. They'll do 360 evaluations, get the peer reviews. If anybody's managing anybody, you get the people underneath to evaluate the managers so that their evaluators know what they look like to their underlings, right? You do the 360s and things like that. And so that personnel manager doesn't have to have a detailed knowledge of what this person is doing. They have to go collect the evidence, right? Go collect up the annotations. What is on my mind is a project manager, which is a bit different thing. And here's kind of an interesting thing. Self-organizing teams have there's a flaw lurking there that I exploit in my classes. Sometimes, like I'll have 43 people or something like that, and I'll say get into teams of 5 and 6. And we'll get all these teams of 6, and then there's 3 people standing up somewhere. And all the teams of 6 are happy, like being all teamy and talky and stuff. And there's 3 people standing there, and they can't join any team. And I use this moment to highlight this strange little kind of gotcha lurking in self-organization, which is nobody's watching the global state. Who's responsible for watching the global state of affairs to detect that it's not that these 3 people have to go and join a group, 3 other groups have to release somebody to form a new group. Who's going to tell the other groups that they have to release somebody, right? And this would be, for me, is one of the roles of a project manager. And we have this problem just recently in the heart of Agile, so George has got his crew of people over here, and Nasoli and me. And I'm trying to get this thing done with some emailers, and I noticed, in fact, here's how, this is part of Crystal Clear. Here's my project management, here's my dependency matrix right here, right? So you could see and it says we need badges, we're waiting on Alistair for this, we're waiting for Josh for that, we're waiting on Georgia for that, we're waiting on Josh for that, we're waiting on Soli for that, we're waiting on Alistair for that, right? So those are all the things we're waiting on. And I got tired of pushing this string, and so I said to Georgia, hey, could you project manager this email capability for us? And he goes, like what? Because he's never seen a project manager. I said, somebody has to walk around and notice that this conversation didn't happen in this team, and these guys aren't working on this, and be the person who says, hey, psst, we put it all together. And if you have all purely self-organizing teams, by and large, and not always, but by and large, nobody's watching that. But I want to tell the story about Spotify because they are absolutely exemplary. And you talked about multiple teams, and I actually wanted to talk about dependencies because the Agile crowd, by and large, likes to pretend that dependencies don't exist, and I happen to disagree with that. So I figure I've got an entire consulting, portfolio around consulting on dependencies because Agile people pretend that they don't exist and they do exist, right? So I go to Spotify. Spotify calls me up. They're excellent, excellent company. They do everything right. Um, and they say we have a dependencies problem, and I go, here I go, right? I'm going to make some money. So I go to Spotify, and very unusually for them, they had a thing with 5 or 6 teams in Stockholm and New York City. They normally don't split location; they're normally all co-located. But this particular case, they acquired a company. They had this. And so I did a check who owes, whom what, and I did A owes B, matrix. And they had some mistakes. They weren't too far off. And so I said to them, there's a process way to fix this, and that is every week, like every Monday morning, each team makes a little spreadsheet and says, I need from that team, I need this decision interface or code, right, by this date in order to make my dates. And then you have a group meeting, and then the cross team manager or whatever facilitates the meeting, and they all sort out, hey, will you give me that? Hey, Jonathan, would you get me that by this date so I can do this? And we have a dialogue. So they go, oh, okay, interesting, and that's a standard technique. It's a structural technique, and this is important. It's a structural technique for handling dependencies. Well, a couple of minutes later, one of the team leads, these are all team leads, one of the guys says, I don't understand, why are we sending this all big spreadsheet into the main place? Why don't I just send what I need to Jonathan? I'll just send him a note each week saying, here's what I need, from you, can I have it? And then we don't have to have this big nasty meeting on Mondays. And so we'll go, oh, that's a good idea. And about 5 minutes later, somebody else goes, I don't understand why I'm sending this thing to Jonathan. Why don't I just talk to him and say, here's what I need? And they all go, oh, okay. And so my whole thing evaporated, right? Because they were just going to talk to each other. So that's behavioral. And so you look at methodologies as a structural component and an attitude component or behavioral component. And these guys at Spotify, they live inside that attitude and behavior component. And so the problem went away. So I waited 3 months, 4 months, and I wrote them. I wanted my consulting gig back, right? So I go, hey, guys, how are you doing with the dependency problem? They go, we don't have a dependency problem. It's all gone. So that's where the self-organization works. So I wanted to contrast where me working with my small team, suffering from people not getting things done, with the Spotify with a bigger problem, having the right person-to-person and the right attitude, we're able to bypass a nasty problem. I wanted to tell that Spotify story because to me, it's one of the most significant stories I've ever heard. Was those guys doing that?
Nice. We have time for one more question, and that's a great segue. With an organization that is looking towards, what practices to put in from a scaling perspective, what models, say, less, Spotify, would you recommend that we look towards, and which ones would you recommend that we look away from?
Oh, so it's really interesting because I have studiously not studied that question, and you'd think that's crazy given like how much scaling is out there. So I may have to think about that, and maybe like next time we have a conversation, you'll say, actually, Alistair, you do know that because blah blah blah, and you said blah blah blah, right? My quarrel with all of those is they're all structural, and none of them are attitude behavior based. And my stuff, the heart of Agile, is all attitude and behavior based. I say fix the attitude, you can fix everything else. It really doesn't matter. In the case of SAFe, let's just take SAFe. I've got no quarrel with the structure of SAFe. I can't find a bug in it, right? These guys, they did their homework. They studied it up. They've got scrums of scrums, backlogs of backlogs, and a big Kanban board at the top. Release train every couple of weeks. Right? That's good. Yeah, I haven't got a fault in it, especially. And the Scrum guys, Jeff Sutherland, he's got a recursive fractal thing. So it ends up pretty similar, scrums of scrums and meta scrums and, whatever. And Les has got some very specific rules because Craig Larman's a very smart guy. I'm probably least excited about Scott Ambler's disciplined agile delivery. It's a little bit like RUP. It's it's make your own motorcycle. Start with a a moving truck and end up with a motorcycle if you throw out all the parts you don't want, that kind of thing. Which is it's kind of hard for people to do, but if you just get one out of the box. But the thing that I talk about a lot, and I haven't shown you, the Heart of Agile sticker, which dummy me, I should have one right here to show you. It's just 4 words. It's a sticker with just 4 words: collaborate, deliver, reflect, and improve. Is to get the attitude right, because if the attitude is there, like at Spotify, the team leads are going to talk to each other. They'll integrate, and you have to sort out: are we all getting integrated at the same time, like every other Friday or 30th of the month? Are we going to do it on staggered, right? And have that discussion and say, what makes sense for us, staggered or tick marks. There's arguments for and against them. They're all end up being kind of recursive structures. So pick one, but then watch where it's kind of like TDD for methodologies. Like where's their problem, right? So you find something stuck and you go, why isn't that working? What And is it a structural unsticking or is it a behavioral unsticking that we want to do? Yeah. So in that sense, I don't have a good answer because I can't say, gee, I love them all, and I can't say they're all nonsense. But they all work or fail based on the attitude of the people. That's what I got.
Excellent point. Okay, good. And I'm glad you mentioned Spotify too, because that's certainly under discussion as well. Although to your point about the behavioral side of things, people look at the structure of Spotify, what they and copy that, but they don't adopt the behavioral side.
Hey, I just want to go down in a moment because the reason Spotify model is known is because Henrik Knieberg went there and worked there in 2013, 2014. And he wrote down the structure that they had in 2013, 2014. And I went there in 2014, 2015. I can't recall which. But because of the way my eyes are shaped, I noticed the cultural elements of the company. He documented the structural elements, not the cultural elements. And then they moved away from that model. And in Spotify, they go, why would anybody copy what we did in 2013, 2014, when in 2020 we're doing something different? What people have to copy is the spirit of experimentation and changing and morphing and the attitude and the communication. And if they get that, then they'll go past, they'll start with the Spotify model. Why not? But then look for where it's not serving you and start getting out of that model, right? So start anywhere and then be asking, so what can we make better, right? But their magic is the fact that they go for attitude and behavior for all of their problems as a first level solution. And it gets them so far.
And I think we will we'll wrap up on that note. I would, on behalf of everybody that joined in, thank you for taking the time. Thank you to Dr. Coburn for joining us. Is there any place that you'd recommend that we go for learning more about what you're doing with Agile nowadays?
Well, the Heart of Agile website, so www.heartofagile.com. And it's got a library. If you click on the library there, it's got some articles on improving collaboration. What is the Heart of Agile? It's got my talks, the expansion of the Heart of Agile. It's got a link to our new work is making a Heart of Agile Academy not with certified courses like Scrum Master, but with skills development courses, improving collaboration, Kanban, feedback, flow, reflection workshops, stuff like that. But I would start with the library in the Heart of Agile site, which has got some articles, talks, and so on.
Excellent. We posted in the announcement, so everybody should have access to that. Thank you again, Dr. Coburn. We appreciated your time and enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much
for joining us.
I'm leaving now.